The car turned left when it should have turned right, and I knew, before Lindsay said a word. We should have been heading back toward King Street. Instead, we were on the highway moving south toward Cambridge, and the familiar skyline of Kitchener was dissolving in the side mirror, and my daughter's hands were fixed on the steering wheel, the same way they had been fixed on it ever since she married Sean 8 years ago, and learned to drive like someone navigating a negotiation. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere you can get the proper support, Mum." She did not look at me. "You just had surgery." It had been a hip replacement. 5 days in Grand River Hospital, followed by 2 sessions with a physiotherapist who had given me exercises on a printed sheet and told me recovery was straightforward, as long as I had help at home for the first few weeks. I had planned to spend those weeks in my condo. I had planned to eat soup from my own pot and watch the red maple outside my window and do the exercises on my own printed sheet and heal at my own pace. "The physiotherapist said I could go home," I said. "She said you needed consistent support," Lindsay replied. Sean and I looked into it together. I had been looking into things on my own for 67 years. But I had learned enough in the past 2 years not to say so when Sean had already been part of the looking. The facility was called Riverside Gardens. There was neither a river nor a garden visible from the entrance. A woman at the front desk smiled at me with professional warmth and handed me a welcome sheet printed on yellow paper. My room was on the 2nd floor, narrow but clean, with a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Someone had placed a silk flower in a plastic cup on the nightstand. Lindsay set my overnight bag on the bed. She handed me an envelope. Inside was $47 in Canadian bills and coins. "This should cover whatever you need for the next little while," she said. "When will you be back?" "We'll call when things settle." She touched my shoulder. "Sean's dealing with a lot right now." She kissed my forehead without meeting my eyes and walked to the elevator. And the sound of the doors closing was the last I heard of my daughter that day. My name is Marion Selby. I taught grade 4 at Westwood Public School in Kitchener for 31 years. I was married to a man named Walter, who had been a pipefitter by trade and a carver of small wooden birds by inclination, and who had left me 3 years earlier in the careful, dignified way that he had approached most things in his life. We had owned a condo in a quiet part of the city since the year before he was diagnosed, and after Walter died I had stayed there with his books and the robin he had carved from a piece of maple he found on a job site in 1997. The robin sat on my kitchen windowsill. I had placed it there the week we moved in and had never found a reason to move it. I did not know, on that first evening at Riverside Gardens, that the condo was already gone. The power of attorney had been Sean's idea. He had come with Lindsay 3 weeks before my surgery, carrying a folder the way he carried most things, as though the folder confirmed something. He set it on my kitchen table and explained that a continuing power of attorney for property was something every person my age should establish before a major medical procedure. It would allow Lindsay to pay my utilities, handle mail, deal with anything that came up while I was recovering. "Standard practice," he said. His own mother had done the same before her knee surgery. I asked whether I should read it with a lawyer. Sean said that was always an option if I wanted to add delay and expense to something straightforward. Lindsay took my hand. "Mum, we're trying to make this easier for you." I signed. I learned the rest in pieces. On my 4th day at Riverside Gardens, I called the building manager at my condo to ask about mail forwarding. He told me, gently and with evident discomfort, that the unit had changed ownership the previous Thursday, 3 days before my surgery. The new owners had already requested that all mail be redirected. I put the phone down. Through the window, a man in a reflective vest was smoking beside a delivery truck. He finished the cigarette and ground it under his boot and got back in the truck and drove away, and I sat there after he was gone, because sitting was all I could do. The condo had sold for $487,000. I learned this later. I learned where the money went later still. But in that room on that afternoon, I knew only that the key in my purse was now a key to a lock that no longer existed. A nurse named Brenda checked on me that evening. She was practical and unhurried, the kind of person who does not perform concern but simply acts on it. She found me sitting in the dark and turned on the lamp and asked what had happened. I told her the parts I understood. She did not offer solutions. She brought tea and sat with me for a few minutes and said when she stood to leave, "Don't make any decisions tonight, there's time." I was not certain there was, but I held on to the words anyway. The call came on my 6th day at the facility, at 9:41 in the evening. The woman on the line introduced herself as Miss Fraser. She said she was a lawyer in Waterloo calling on behalf of the estate of Clifford Huang. She said she had been attempting to locate me for several months, and that her letters to my condo address had been returned after the ownership change, and that she had eventually traced me through the Waterloo Region District School Board's retiree contact records. Clifford Huang had been in my grade 4 class in 1988. He was 9 years old, small and quiet, and he came to school every day in mismatched shoes, and with the expression of a child who has learned not to expect too much from rooms full of adults. He was reading 2 full levels below his age. His file noted that his father had left the previous year. His mother worked shifts at a textile plant in Cambridge. I moved him to the front of the classroom in October. I started meeting with him before the bell each morning. 20 minutes, just the 2 of us and a reading book, and the particular quiet of a school before the other children arrived. By March, he was reading at grade level. By June, he was writing stories in a green notebook he had bought with his own money. He came back to see me twice after he left Westwood, once in high school, once in his early 20s, on his way to Vancouver with a backpack and the beginning of a software idea he tried to explain to me in terms I only partially followed. I told him it sounded worth pursuing. He said, I was the reason he believed things were worth pursuing. That was the last I saw of him. Ms. Fraser told me that Clifford had died 8 months earlier of pancreatic cancer, at 53, in a house in East Vancouver. His company had been acquired by a national technology firm 7 years before his death. The proceeds had been invested, the estate had been settled. A particular bequest had been held in trust pending my location. She told me the amount. $9,400,000. I asked her to say it again. She did. I set the phone on the nightstand. The lamp was on. The silk flower sat in its plastic cup. I thought about the morning Clifford had read the last page of his first chapter book out loud to me in an empty classroom, and then looked up at my face as though checking whether I had noticed. I had noticed. I had always noticed. Miss Fraser said there was a sealed letter. Clifford had asked that she give me time to absorb the news before forwarding it. The transfer could begin once I had retained my own legal counsel. I told her I would call her back in the morning. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about a $47 envelope, and a silk flower that had never been alive, and the sound of elevator doors closing on my daughter's retreating back. Then I thought about what I was going to do next. In the morning, I asked Brenda if she knew how to reach legal aid. She wrote down 2 numbers on a piece of paper from her own pocket. That afternoon, I reached a duty counsel who referred me to a private practice lawyer named Mr. Holloway, whose office was in downtown Kitchener and who had worked on elder financial abuse cases. He met me in the Riverside Gardens common room 3 days later. He arrived with a notepad and no folder and listened to everything I said without hurrying any of it. The Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee investigation took 11 weeks. It found that the continuing power of attorney for property had been used in a manner inconsistent with my interests as the grantor. The condo proceeds had been transferred into a joint account held by Lindsay and Sean, and from there into the down payment on a 4-bedroom house in North Waterloo. Purchased the same week I went into surgery. The breach of fiduciary duty was documented. A restitution order followed. I did not tell Lindsay about the inheritance until after the OPGT file was open, after Mr. Holloway had helped me establish a protected account that no POA document could reach, and after I had moved out of Riverside Gardens into a furnished apartment near Victoria Park in Kitchener, with east-facing window and a kitchen where I could make my own tea in my own time. She came without calling, a Tuesday in November. I went down to the lobby and we walked to a bench in the park because I did not want her in my home yet. The leaves were already down. A pair of geese moved along the waterline. She brought the folder. Sean had prepared projections, timelines, a schedule of what they intended to repay once the North Waterloo house appreciated enough to refinance. She spoke for several minutes about pressure and circumstances and best interests. You used a legal document to take my home, I said. I acted within the terms of the POA. While I was sedated. She looked at the path. The geese moved slowly toward the far end of the pond. I was going to explain everything once you were settled, she said. You settled me in a rehabilitation room with $47, I said. You had already sold my home before I went into the operating room. Mum, I want to ask you something. I kept my voice level. On the morning of my surgery, when you dropped me at the hospital entrance and told me everything would be fine, did you already know the condo had sold? The geese reached the far edge and turned. Lindsay watched them. Yes, she said. I stood. I told her Mr. Holloway would be in contact with her lawyer. I told her the OPGT investigation had already found what it found, and that the path forward involved correcting what had been done, not discussing whether it ought to be corrected. She said I was turning a family problem into a legal proceeding. It became a legal proceeding, I said. When your husband put that document on my kitchen table and your name went on the account. I walked home through the park and did not look back. Clifford's letter arrived by courier the following week. He had written it in a rented house in East Vancouver in the fall of 2013. He wrote that he had been thinking about the way money changes a person's memory. How success could make someone forget which rooms they came from and who had left the lights on. He wrote that he had decided the money he's left behind should reach the person who had first shown him that showing up was worth it. He remembered the mornings before the bell. He remembered the green notebook. He remembered looking up from the last page of that first chapter book and checking my face and finding something that was not was relief, but was something better than relief. I don't know what your life looks like now, he wrote. I hope it is warm and full and your own. If things have become hard in the way they sometimes do for people who gave more than they ever got back, I hope this is the thing that changes it. I hope it gives you the room to make the next part yours. I read the letter twice. I placed it in the nightstand drawer and sat for a while with my hands in my lap. The legal transfer took 4 months to complete. By March, I had full access to an amount of money I was still adjusting to understanding. I bought a small stone house in Prince Edward County, 2 hours east, on a road that meets a vineyard at one end and a stretch of limestone shoreline at the other. 3 bedrooms, a wide porch, a kitchen where morning light stayed until nearly noon. I brought Walter's robin and set it on the windowsill above the sink and stood there for a moment and let myself feel what it was to have a windowsill again. I established a fund through Legal Aid Ontario for older adults facing financial abuse through misused powers of attorney. I named it the Westwood Fund, for the school, not for me. I purchased a shuttered motel property off Highway 6 east of Guelph. 11 rooms, a parking lot, and good bones underneath. A contractor renovated it over 5 months. Proper beds, proper heating. A common room with a full kitchen and enough table space that people could sit without crowding one another. Brenda, who had left Riverside Gardens by the time it lost its rehabilitation contract, agreed to manage intake. We called the new place Robin's Rest for Walter's carvings, which seemed right in a way that did not require much explaining. The first resident was a retired letter carrier named Doris. She came with 1 small suitcase and a bus pass and sat in the common room on her first evening and drank tea for a long time without saying anything. I sat with her. There was no reason to hurry. The restitution order arrived in February. Lindsay and Sean were required to repay the full condo proceeds, plus statutory interest calculated from the date of sale. Refinancing the North Waterloo house was difficult. I did not make it easier and I did not make it harder. I simply stopped carrying what was not mine to carry. Lindsay called once, in March, and said she had not understood how serious it was until it was too late. I told her she had understood exactly how serious it was, which was why she had done it while I was under anaesthesia and could not ask questions. She said she wanted to rebuild things between us. That's a long road, I said. It begins with not adding to what's already been broken. I'll be watching for that. Abby came to Prince Edward County in April on a bus from Waterloo. She was 16 and she had saved the fare from her weekend job. She stood on my porch looking at the farmland and the distant glint of water and said it was very quiet. That's why I chose it, I said. We walked the limestone shore the next morning and I told her about Clifford Huang, the mismatched shoes, the green notebook, the mornings before the bell, just the 2 of us and a book in an empty classroom. I told her that kindness doesn't stay where you leave it. She was quiet for a while, looking at the water. Dad says you're keeping the money to punish them, she said. What do you think? I think you bought a place where people can stay when their families let them down. She paused. That doesn't seem like punishment. It seems like what you decided to do with it. Yes, I said, that's exactly what it is. I had set up her university fund through Mr. Holloway's office, a designated account in her name, accessible when needed, with no other signatory and no conditions attached to the rest of her life. She cried a little when I told her, Dad's going to say you're buying my loyalty. Tell him I'm helping you begin, I said. There's a difference. Lindsay came to see me once more, alone, in July. She arrived on a Saturday morning without calling ahead and stood at my gate for a moment before I opened it. She looked thinner. The proceedings had cost them. I did not pretend otherwise. We had coffee on the porch and she said she had written and rewritten what she wanted to say and had finally decided to put none of it in a speech. Then say what you mean, I told her. She said she had been so focused on solving the financial problem that I had become part of the problem, rather than a person living separately from it. She said she had stopped seeing me as someone with a life that mattered on its own terms. Yes, I said, that's what happened. I'm not asking you to forgive me today. Good, I said, because I'm not there today. She looked at the county road and the barn across from my property, and the stand of maples beginning to go gold at the edges. It's a beautiful place, she said. It is, I chose it myself. She left before dinner, and I did not offer dinner, and she did not ask. That felt like a beginning, or at least like the absence of a further ending, which was its own kind of thing. That evening I sat on the porch after dark and held Walter's robin in both hands and listened to the county sounds. Frogs the road whined, moving through the maples. No parking lot light, no silk flower in a plastic cup, no voice telling me someone else was dealing with a lot right now and would call when things settled. I had spent 31 years teaching children that showing up was the first and most important thing. Clifford Huang had grown up to believe it. He had grown into a man who built something and kept the memory of who had been there in the morning when no one else was. And he had put that memory in writing and trusted it would reach me. He was right. The money did not save me. The money arrived after I had already decided, sitting alone in a narrow room in Cambridge, with $47 on the nightstand, that a woman who had spent 3 decades teaching other people's children how to read was not ready to be managed. What the money gave me was the room to be deliberate, to choose who received my care and under what terms, to make sure Doris had a proper kitchen and Brenda had work that suited her, and Abby had a start that belonged only to her, with no other name on the account and no one's approval required. I had a voice before that phone rang. I had always had a voice. I had spent too many years lowering it for people who mistook my patience for permission. I do not make that mistake anymore.